points out there, there's a lot of stupid tests and silly information on how to bake bread. Now, I'm not going to get into all of these, but there's some crazy things like, oh, let's put our bread in our oven without preheating it and see what happens. Duh. Oh, let's put the bread in the oven and then once we preheated it and then turn it off. You need a really super, super hot oven. And most bakers and bakeries bake it hotter than your oven would even go. All this type of stuff is just absolute BS. And however, what they're all doing through these little tests and everything, and they don't even realize it, is they're proving the point that I'm making in this video. So let's talk about oven spring. Well, more appropriately, spring. Spring starts from the moment you kick your dough out of the mixer and start further processing it. Now, spring is about CO2 gas production coming from yeast. So you made this loaf of bread. Now what happens is you put it on your counter or in a warm location, and ultimately gas is being produced by the yeast to leaven it. Okay. As you put it into the oven, of course, the temperature is higher, and so therefore the yeast is more active and it's rapidly producing gas, which gives you oven spring. As you start moving higher in the temperature, you can see that the gas production starts to drop, and ultimately at 140 degrees Fahrenheit, your yeast is dead. It's very important to have a baking temperature which sets the internal structure enough that you don't get collapse. Now, generally, this happens at 375 degrees or 190 degrees Celsius is kind of a minimum bake temperature where you can pretty much be assured that you're going to get your structure set. Now, I have seen some people baking at 350. That's fine also, but to really make sure that you're going to get it set, I think this is a good minimum to work with. So as I just mentioned, okay, we want to get this internal structure set. So it's better to bake a little bit higher. I said 375 minimum. I would, generally breads and rolls and hamburger buns and, whole wheat breads and all this stuff are baked somewhere between 400 and 440 degrees, depending on your oven, depending on the type of formula that you're using. But generally within that range, you're going to get your structure set and optimize your oven spring within those temperature ranges. Now, keep in mind that ultimately at the end of the day, in order to make sure that your loaf is baked, you want an internal temperature of around 190 degrees. Okay, some breads do require a little bit more, like rye breads, but general as a rule of thumb, if you've attained 190 degree internal temperature, your loaf is baked. Now you'll get good oven spring at many different temperature ranges, like I told you, all the way up to 470 or whatever. Some of these guys talking about these crazy temperatures. Remember that these higher bake temperatures are mostly about the crust characteristics that they're looking for, or the crumb characteristics. They want a chewy or drier product. Bake temperatures need to be high enough that they set the structure of your product no matter what temperature that you're baking at, so you don't get the collapse by having not enough structure set within a given period of time, and that time is usually in and around when your yeast is done. Now, high hydration and artisan style breads, they can be baked a little bit hotter because once again, it's just really about the type of characteristics that you want. Now, these are high hydration doughs, and they will do perfectly fine at the temperatures that I've just told you about, anywhere from 400 degrees up as high as you like, depending on what you want. All it will do is affect the characteristics of your bread crust and crumb. So contrary to what you see online, super hot ovens do not contribute to oven spring. This is about setting the structure of your bread and giving you the crust and crumb characteristics that you want. Now, for pan breads, The big boys, they will use a slightly lower temperature at the beginning of baking. It'll provide more opportunity for oven spring than a hot. Now figure that out. It's easy. The slower you set the crust, the better opportunities you have for that loaf to expand. Really hot ovens like they use for some of these artisan style breads, if they did not use steam, those breads would be a lot shorter in volume. Steam also helps contribute to keeping the surface of the product a little moister and not allowing it to crust over as quickly. And that is the saving grace behind really high temperature baking. So anyway, I like to try to teach people how to bake, not do silly little experiments teaching them how not to bake. So always preheat your oven. Okay, we all know this. Don't try to, put a bread into your oven cold and then crank it up and let it go. I think this is common sense. Everybody knows that. Consistent temperatures are better than major temperature adjustments. Now, if you've got a high sugar dough, you may want to reduce the temperature in the final, 5 minutes or whatever of baking, just so you can reduce the amount of coloring that you're getting on your product. Many bakeries do this. They will drop the temperatures in the final stages of baking just to control coloring on higher sugar content doughs. Not like this guy in the video that says, hey, what I like to do is I like to put my bread in the oven at a really hot temperature because that's where I get my oven spring. And then what I do is I turn it down to 40 degrees lower and I bake it for the last half of its baking at that temperature. Now he's not talking 40 degrees Fahrenheit, he's talking 40 degrees Celsius. Unreal, absolute crazy. I don't know any bakery or bakers that really do this, but he's not a baker, so there you go. Anyway, baking temperatures above 205 degrees or 400 is better than low temperatures as a general rule. Cooling baking temperatures like 375. Now you start getting into, maybe a little bit paler of a crust. So you got a paler of a crust, so you have to extend the bake time. You're extending the bake time and you're getting a drier crumb. Now remember, baking is about baking the product as quickly as possible in the least amount of time so you retain the moisture, but you get the characteristics that you want. The right color, this, that. You don't want, unless you want a real dry bread, better to bake quicker than slower. Really hot ovens do not give you better oven spring. I think we know that already. And if you're using a Dutch oven, remember you might need to have a hotter oven because it's not the temperature of your oven that you need to worry about, but it's about having a proper internal chamber temperature. So keep that in mind. Yes, you can go with a hotter preheated oven, but you don't need to go crazy. And you can produce beautiful breads with an internal chamber temperature of 400 plus degrees. It's all about the characteristics that you want at the end of the day. Thank you very much for watching the video. I hope you learned a little bit of something out of this one. I always try to give a little bit of information in there that's a little different from some of the other websites. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to drop me a line. I'll be happy to answer any of your baking questions. And remember, please give me a like and a subscribe down below. It really, really helps with this YouTube stuff, and especially when you're starting off like I am. So thank you. We'll see you again next time on No BS Baking.